an attendant from the fragrant coral palace arrived, bearing a tray of garments for the banquet. Glad for their gracious hospitality, I pulled on the yellow satin dress with turquoise beads thickly sewn into its hem and cuffs. A sea green sash went around my waist, its silken tassels falling to my knees. The style of this garment was different from those in the celestial kingdom, leaving my jade pendant bared below the hollow of my neck. My only other adornment was a comb of pearls tucked into the crown of my head as my dark hair flowed loosely down my back. Captain Wenji waited for me outside. My pulse leapt unexpectedly as I walked toward him. He was striking tonight in a forest green robe with a gleaming length of black silk knotted around his waist. His hair was gathered into a carved jade ring falling over his shoulder like waves of night. It was as though my eyes were rinsed, finally seeing with startling clarity all the fine features that which Xu Zhao had described. The wind blew gently that evening. I inhaled the cool air, drowning my senses in the fragrance of the sea, a bewitching mixture of sunshine and salt, laced with an undercurrent of excitement. The rays from the setting sun painted the waters crimson and vermilion, the fragrant coral palace glowing like a jewel in the horizon. In the banquet hall, hundreds of lanterns were strung across the ceiling, luminous and bright. Low wooden tables and brocade-padded chairs were arranged around the walls, leaving an empty space in the center of the room. In one corner sat an elegant lady playing a pipa, the four-stringed wooden instrument shaped like an elongated pear. As she plucked its strings, the melancholy strains of her song filled the air. Her playing was masterful. From the twang of a single string, she wrung a river of sorrow and an ocean of grief. The king and queen sat on a dais at the far end of the hall. A magnificent gold flower with a pearl the size of my palm gleamed from the queen's hair. The petals fluttered around the pearl, which glowed white one moment, morphing to the deepest black the next. A little boy stood beside her, clutching her hand. His head barely came up to the armrest of her throne, and his dark eyes were large and solemn. Beside him stood an elegant lady in apricot silk with strands of round pink pearls looped around her neck. Her delicate chin was tilted up as she scrutinized the hall with an expression of regal aloofness. "Is that His Majesty's daughter?" I asked Captain Wenji, as we went to greet our hosts. "His Majesty has only two sons, Prince Yanji, whom you've met, and Prince Yanming." Following my gaze, he added, "The lady standing with Prince Yanming is Lady Anmei, his governess. She's the daughter of a powerful nobleman, and her family holds great influence at this court." After we paid our respects to the royal family, an attendant showed us to our table. Captain Wenji filled our cups, and I took a sip of the wine, the mild sweetness of the fermented grains lingering on my tongue. The silver plates before us were piled with exotic foods, most of which I had never seen before. Glossy red crustaceans, golden jellyfish, and black spiked spheres. I thought those looked particularly unappetizing, although the other guests ate it with relish. Captain Wenji took one and sliced it open, passing half to me. I scooped up its flesh and slid it into my mouth, savoring its creamy yet briny taste. "Is the food to your liking?" Prince Yanji asked, appearing before us unexpectedly. I choked on my mouthful, coughing loudly. Grabbing my cup, I took a large gulp of wine before hastily rising to greet him. He inclined his head in acknowledgment, saying, "Captain Wenji, my father wishes to speak with you. He asked if you would join him at his table." "I will accompany First Archer Xingyin until your return." A frown flitted across Captain Wenji's face, only to vanish in the next instant. He bowed to the prince before walking toward the dais. I could not help noticing how Lady Anmei brightened when he took the empty seat at their table. Prince Yanji lowered himself onto the chair as he looked intently at me. For some reason, I did not find his interest offensive. Perhaps it was the open curiosity in his expression, or the humor as I boldly returned his stare, determined not to be the first to break the silence. "First Archer, where did you learn your skills?" The candid way he spoke reminded me of General Jian Yun. "I trained alongside Prince Li Wei when I was his companion." I responded in a similar vein, hoping he did not catch the quiver in my voice. Recognition dawned. "Of course. I remember you from the banquet. You played the flute well. Do you still?" "No." I looked away from him. I had not played since that night. Perhaps sensing my unease, he asked, "Why did you join the Celestial Army? Was this your family's wish?" "The general who mentored my early training offered me a position." His fingertips played with the rim of his cup. Surely there must have been many other opportunities available to one who had served the crown prince. Not where I would have the freedom to make my own way. I have no family to advance me and only my skills to depend on. I lifted the cup to my mouth and took a long drink. But this is my choice. I would not seek another, I added, thinking of the crimson lion talisman. A smile played upon his lips, his eyes crinkling. They were not black as I had imagined, but the deep opaque blue of uncut sapphires. He picked up the porcelain jug to refill my cup. Your candor is refreshing. The wine was going to my head, loosening my tongue. Why does your highness have so many questions for someone like me? Because there aren't many like you. Captain Wenji holds you in high esteem. You must be exceptionally skilled to be ranked the first archer, yet you look like no warrior I have ever encountered. I returned his smile. As there were no women in your army, I'm not surprised. He threw back his head and laughed. I apologize. I am not usually so inept in my compliments. Had I heard him correctly? Growing aware of the sudden lull in conversation, I glanced around the hall. Many of the Eastern Sea immortals were staring at us, whispering amongst themselves. Your presence with me is causing quite a stir. Perhaps your highness should attend to your other guests, I suggested, belatedly realizing one does not dismiss a prince of the realm. Fortunately, he appeared amused rather than incensed. Have I made you uncomfortable? That was not my intent. I merely wanted to get to know you better. People interest me as much as books, music, or art interests others. My fingers twisted the soft fabric of my skirt as I searched in vain for an appropriate response. His eyes gleamed as they fixed upon my throat. Your pendant. The amulet is a rare one. Could you tell me its origin? My throat went dry. I had been asked about my family enough times that there was a ready answer on the tip of my tongue. However, no one had ever asked me about my father's pendant, usually tucked beneath my robe. I thought it was a common jewel, its only value to me in its heritage. I found it in the marketplace, the one that appears every 5 years in the Celestial Kingdom, I said quickly. A fortunate find. He drew out each word. I shifted my seat, wondering if he had seen through my lie. I was tempted to change the subject, to venture to safer ground, but his interest had piqued my own. Perhaps he knew something about my father's pendant. Why did you call it an amulet? Because it is one. A powerful one, too, for protection. My fingers reached up to stroke the jade. Had my father worn this to challenge the sunbirds? Had it protected him from their deadly flame? Prince Yanji leaned closer to scrutinize the stone. Unfortunately, it seems to have been damaged. The crack in the rim. Can it be restored? I asked a little too eagerly. The corners of his mouth dipped. From its carving, this appears to be a talisman of the dragons. If so, only they can restore it. My spirit sank as I released the pendant. The dragons were no longer in the immortal realm. Banished, Prince Yanji had said, echoing the tale I had heard as a child. You know a lot about the dragons. In the Celestial Kingdom there is little information on them, I remarked. The venerable dragons, as they were called, were born in the Eastern Sea and lived here until their banishment. Though they were never under our rule, our historians, scholars, and scribes gathered all the information they could find on them. Despite their fearsome appearance, the dragons were wise and benevolent, using their might to aid those in need and maintain the peace in our waters. Many revered them, the merfolk, sea immortals, even the mortals. Many mourn their loss still. If you are interested to learn more, you are welcome to visit our library. Thank you. I was grateful for his generous offer. According to Captain Wenji, it was not one made lightly. My curiosity was pricked, especially after missing my earlier opportunity, and I longed to immerse myself in the library, if only I had the leisure to do so. Your Highness, have you heard of the Jade Dragon Bow? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. His body stiffened, almost imperceptibly. Why do you ask? I heard someone speak of it, and I wondered who wielded such a powerful weapon. No one, he said gravely. It was lost along with its owner, even before the dragons were banished, and will probably never be found again. It was on the tip of my tongue to confide in him that the bow was not lost, that it was in my keeping, but I knew little of the prince, and I had promised Captain Wenji not to speak of it. Moreover, he seemed to know nothing of its owner's whereabouts. The chime of bells drew my attention with their ringing, silvery tones. Dancers entered, gliding to the center of the hall in a swirl of blue and green silk. A string of golden bells dangled from their waists, and their ornate headdresses were studded with precious gems. Each performer carried a polished jade stick to which a wide red ribbon was attached. When the people players struck up a new song, a livelier melody with rippling strains, they lifted their sticks and danced. Their graceful bodies twirled and dipped and spun, their ribbons streaming after them as bright as living flames. Sighs of appreciation swelled through the crowd, my own among them. Two dancers sprang into the air, their ribbons spinning around their bodies in a graceful spiral. When they landed, another leapt up high, arcing toward the thrones in a remarkable display of agility. As my eyes followed her, wide with admiration, something bright slid from the base of her stick. The softness of her expression morphed into a ruthlessness of a predator. My gut clenched with dread. On instinct, I darted for a weapon. Finding none, I snatched up a silver plate instead, hurling it at the leaping dancer. It struck her in the temple, knocking her headdress askew. She cried out as she fell to the ground in a tangled heap of silk and ribbon. Guests shot to their feet, shouting in alarm. A few glared at me as though I had lost my mind, disrupting the performance with uncivil conduct. She has a weapon, I warned Prince Tianji. He sprang up at once, barking orders to the guards to apprehend the dancer. After a few tense moments, a guard ran toward us. His face was grim as he held out a cluster of sharp needles, glistening with viscous remnants of greenish liquid. Sea scorpion venom, Prince Yanji hissed. It spread swiftly, paralyzing the entire body. Too much would be fatal. The music had stopped when the dancer fell, leaving the hall in ominous silence. The guests exchanged confused glances, their mutterings no longer outraged but anxious and urgent. The air shifted, taut with strain. Something thudded against the wall. Metal clashed, blood-curdling cry ringing out. Beside me, Prince Yanji drew his sword. The doors were flung open, a guard standing in the entrance, his blue and silver armor streaked with blood. Merfolk! We're under attack! A spear hurtled through his chest with a wet crunch, its tip now drenched with blood. The soldier's eyes bulged as he lurched forward before falling to his knees and keeling over. Guests stumbled to their feet, overturning tables and chairs as they scrambled to the back of the room. Captain Wenji leapt down from the dais, his blade already unsheathed. I cursed that my hands were empty, but the prince stripped a bow and a quiver from a nearby guard and tossed them to me. Plucking an arrow, I drew it through the string, its red shaft as hard and cool as stone. Fire coral. Merfolk are vulnerable to it, Prince Yanji said tightly, his knuckles white around the hilt of his sword. Assailants swarmed into the hall. Their armor was woven from small scales that gleamed like mother of pearl. They raced towards us, turquoise pupils bright, their braided hair flying behind them. Their fair skin was coated with an iridescent sheen, as though I were looking at them through a pane of colored glass. My skin crawled at the sight of their curved swords, coated with the same venom as on the needles. Those cut by the blades froze where they stood, their limbs jerking unsteadily, their eyes wide with horror. As Prince Yanji rushed into the fray, a merman lunged at him. At once I released an arrow, striking the attacker in the shoulder. He fell to the floor, clutching the shaft embedded in his flesh. I hardened myself to the sight, to his gasps. Remorse I could ill afford as I shot arrow after arrow at the invaders, though I aimed for their limbs when I could. Captain Wenji would have rebuked me had he realized this. To him, an enemy was an enemy, and to show mercy in a battle was to leave your back unguarded. Yet I could not help wondering why the merfolk had risen against the sea immortals. I was learning that kings were not always as just as the stories, and the mercy of the gods was sometimes flawed. Blood splattered the floor, and my palms were slick with sweat. My arrows plunged forth in a relentless stream, the agonized cries of those struck beating at my conscience. I forced my attention back to the weapons the merfolk bore, the harm they had inflicted. but for as many who fell beneath our arrows and blades, more poured through the doors. Our own forces dwindled as we formed a protective ring around the royal family and guests. The merfolk's eyes gleamed with anticipation as they closed in on us. They had the advantage. We were outnumbered. They raised their hands. The smell of brine thickened the air as torrents of water gushed into the hall. Captain Wenji flung his power out, shards of ice plunging toward the merfolk. Several fell, yet the water swirled higher, drenching our shoes and robes, swelling until a towering wave loomed above. Captain Yansheng's energy rippled from him, dispersing the wave, though others surged in its place, more and more, springing up around us until we were hemmed in by quivering walls of water, on the cusp of breaking and washing us away. A soft cry from behind pierced me, that of a child, muffling his fear. Was he Prince Yanming? Grasping my energy, I summoned the wind, hurtled into the hall, arcing over us like a translucent dome, glistening ice streaking across it as Wenji threw his energy alongside mine. Just in time as the waves fell crashing across our barrier, I staggered beneath the crushing weight, my limbs aching as I fought back my exhaustion. Just when I thought I would collapse, Prince Yanji's power surged forth, sweeping the water up and hurling it over the merfolk. Footsteps thudded from a distance. I stiffened, bracing for a fresh onslaught as I raised my bow, my sore hands already drawing an arrow at the ready. More soldiers streamed into the hall, this time clad in the blue and silver armor of the Eastern Sea. I sagged with relief, lowering my weapon. The merfolk charged at the soldiers, fighting valiantly, but were soon overwhelmed. The captured leader was dragged forward. Blood trickled from a wide gash across his cheek, and his pupils glowed with blue flame. Assassins masquerading as dancers with poisoned needles to kill our king. What other despicable tactics has Governor Ren Yu stooped to? Prince Yanji asked scathingly. All tactics are honorable when dealing with a dragon killer, the merman spat. What do you mean? Explain yourself. King Yangzheng demanded, his voice thick with outrage. Such hatred emanated from the merman's gaze. Governor Renyu told us how you were jealous of the dragon's power and resented their refusal to bow to your rule. You conspired with the celestial emperor to imprison and slay them. Prince Yanji shuddered as though repulsed. A vicious pack of lies. We revered the dragons. We honor them still. We never sought to rule them. It sufficed that they were graced us with their presence. His tone hardened. To accuse my father of this is obscene and unworthy of your intelligence. The merman snarled. You lie as well as your father. Prince Yanji lunged at him, but Captain Wenji grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Beyond your governor's claims, what proof do you have that the dragons were murdered? Captain Wenji wanted to know. Confusion flashed across the merman's face, though he remained obstinately silent. King Yanzheng spoke calmly. Your governor has shown you no proof because none exists. His claims are meritless, his accusations false. Nothing more than empty words to stir you to do his bidding. The merman bared his teeth. Governor Renyu swears he will avenge the death of the dragons. Once the unworthy king is deposed, he will restore the merfolk to our glory. He shut his mouth, turning away. Was he afraid to let something slip, or had an enchantment prevented him from doing so? Captain Wenji did not seem to notice as he laughed, a mirthless sound. Does the governor intend to take the crown after murdering your rightful ruler? How noble of him to ascend the throne in the name of seeking retribution for the dragons. The merman shook his head vehemently. No, Governor Renyu is honorable. He only wishes to... Again his words cut off. King Yangzheng sighed. I wished we could have done more to aid the dragons. We pleaded with the celestial emperor to rescind their punishment, to release them, but he refused. They had indeed challenged his authority, and our hands were tied. The dragons would not have wanted us to go to war with the celestial kingdom. They valued peace above all. Dragons have not been seen for centuries, the merman cried. That does not mean they're dead, Prince Yanji countered. We would sense it if such light faded from our world. As the merman sneered, I bit my lip, staring at him. Something felt wrong. His eyes blazed with conviction, and he spoke with passion. Yet why did he stake his life and honor on hollow claims alone? Captain Wenji's voice broke through the silence, soft and low. What was your purpose today? To kill the king and heir? Yet the Eastern Sea's allies would never accept Governor Renyu as king. What was the governor's plan? The merman raised his chin in defiance. Do your worst. I will tell you nothing. Oh, you will, Captain Wenji said, each word ringed with steel. I have found there are ways to extract even the most precious secrets, not just fire and ice, but those from the mortal world, limbs severed, skin flayed, flesh boiled in oil. A chill sank through me, though I kept my face still. The merman flinched as Captain Wenji leaned toward him. If you will not speak, one of your friends might be persuaded to. If not, your people will suffer the wrath of the Celestial Kingdom. They will be banished from the Eastern Sea, exiled to the Golden Desert, left to wander and wither beneath the heat of the sun for eternity upon the parched sands. Prince Tianji inhaled sharply as his father turned pale. To a sea immortal, such a fate must be worse than death. They had maintained their composure through the grim talk of torture, yet I did not think they possessed the stomach for this harsh a punishment. But what mattered was what the merman believed. I had heard Captain Wenji was skilled at extracting answers from stubborn prisoners without resorting to physical cruelties. The rumors had not been exaggerated. Already the merman showed signs of caving, his breathing quickening, his eyes darting around, yet always returning to the captain. I had witnessed Captain Wenji's unwavering resolve in battle, his fearlessness in charging to the fore. His honor and bravery were revered by the soldiers, but this was a new facet of his personality. Perhaps they were two sides of the same coin. One could not achieve all he had done without a certain ruthlessness. The merman cowered away. Still, Captain Wenji held his gaze, his pupils obsidian dark. Finally the merman slumped, shaking uncontrollably. No more, he pleaded in a thin rasp. Leave my people alone. Don't hurt them. He gasped as though the words were torn from him. Prince Yanming, even if we failed to kill the king, we were to capture his son. King Yanzheng lurched to his feet. He searched the hall for the young prince, who was huddled beside the queen in a far corner, his head resting upon her shoulder, blissfully unaware of the threat to his family and life. Prince Tianji clutched the hilt of his sword, struggling for composure. A contemptible plan. Governor Renyu must want to crown my brother while he rules as the power behind the throne, after he disposes of the rest of us. He nodded curtly at the guards, who hauled the prisoner away. There was no more fight left in the merman, who drooped like washed-up seagrass. Just a short while ago, the hall had been filled with gaiety and laughter. Now armored soldiers replaced the elegant guests who had fled, the groans from the wounded a poor substitute for the soothing strains from the pipa. I apologized for the abrupt end to our festivities. It was not quite the welcome we had intended, Prince Yanji said ruefully. Prince Wenji's expression was somber. Perhaps not, but we've gained valuable information on Governor Renyu's ambitions, and how far he's willing to go to achieve them. Prince Yanji nodded. We will plan our path forward tomorrow with our commanders. I promise it will be less eventful than tonight, now that we're on the alert. Regardless, we have an ample supply of arrows in the palace. His eyes gleamed as he added, plates too, if the first archer prefers. My lips curved into a hollow smile, though I welcomed his attempt to lighten the mood. Prince Yanji inclined his head to Captain Wenji. Your aid tonight was invaluable, and my father will be sure to commend you to the Celestial Kingdom. Your reputation is indeed well deserved. He glanced in my direction. As is yours, First Archer. I bowed in acknowledgment of his praise, yet my smile faded as I gazed around the hall at the fragments of porcelain and spilled food, mingling with crimson trails of blood.